Hello and welcome friends. Up till now in Unit 5 Salesforce Management we have talked about the Salesforce objectives and Salesforce structure. We talked about the different type of structures that are commonly used. We also talked about how to determine Salesforce size, and we talked about the various components of the compensation. And then we also talked about different types of compensation plans, and then we talked about recruitment, selection, and then training. Now today is the time for us to discuss supervision. How do you supervise the sales force? How do you supervise the salespersons, right? So as a manager, the task for you is not to get the sales on your own, not to go to the fields on your own. The task for you is to manage the sales force that is reporting to you, the salespersons who are reporting to you. So that is why supervision by a sales manager is very important, and this is what we are going to discuss here in this particular slide. So how do you supervise? You'll have to establish some norms. For example, you will have to specify what all tasks have to be accomplished by the salesperson. For example, how many prospect calls should he make in a particular day, or in a particular week, or in a particular month? Because if he is not making any call to any prospect, then he would not be able to generate any new customers for the company. On the other hand, if he is making calls to prospects who are likely to buy product in future, then naturally he would be able to add more customers. So that is why you have a particular norm for prospect calls. Prospect here means somebody who is likely to buy your product in future. And what do we mean by calls? We are not talking about telephonic calls, we are talking about visiting the prospects. So prospect calls here means visiting the prospects, and it is very important if you want to grow your customer base. But then again, the salesperson should also know that when a particular prospect may be converted to a customer, and when a particular prospect is less likely to get converted into a customer, and he should not be spending too much time on those prospects who are not likely to convert into customers. And that is why we have another norm for stopping after unsuccessful calls. So for example, a salesperson has visited a prospect once, tried to convince him, visited twice, visited thrice, and finally has been able to convert him into a customer, and the prospect has actually placed an order. That is fine. But how many times should he visit the prospect, and at what point of time should he stop visiting him, believing that this prospect is not going to get converted into a customer? So there could be a norm that you should not, as a salesperson, you should not be visiting the same prospect more than 5 times, which means if the prospect is not converted into customers in 5 occasions, then the salesperson would be expected to stop calling that particular prospect altogether, and the salesperson should start focusing on some other prospects, right? So there are norms for this also, stopping after how many unsuccessful calls. So after how many unsuccessful calls, as a salesperson, you would be expected to stop and start focusing on some other prospect. Then there should be norms for new customer acquisition. As I said, new customer acquisition norms are very important, because you have to grow your customer base. You simply cannot keep on selling to the existing customer again and again, though you have to retain them, but you also have to grow your customer base, and for that you will have to have this particular norm. So this is a particular standard which has been set for the salesperson, that how many new customers should he add in a particular time duration. So there can be norms for this as well, new customer acquisition. Then please also understand, we have to understand that a salesperson basically has to divide his time in different activities. What are these activities? Please understand. Have a look at these activities here. Preparation. So what do we mean by preparation? I hope you remember the pre-approach stage, wherein we were collecting information about the prospect whom we are going to visit in the approach stage. So that is part of the preparation. You are collecting information about the prospect whom you would be making presentations in some future time period. So whom you would be making presentations to in some future time period. So you are trying to understand what kind of person he is, what kind of product he has already purchased, whom is he purchasing from, Is he very sticky in the sense that he doesn't want to spend too much money? So you want to know about that particular prospect. So that is part of the preparation, and you also are going to customize your presentation according to the requirements of the prospect. So that will all be part of the preparation phase. Then naturally the salesperson will have to go to the field and visit the various prospects, prospect firms or individuals. Then naturally salesperson is also a human being, and he would have to stop in between for food and break. He might take toilet break, he might be resting during night. Then now this waiting time is a very important aspect, because many a times the prospect may keep the salesperson waiting, so that also has to be accounted for. So how much time is the prospect, how much time is the salesperson waiting for the prospect? So this is one more thing, another activity wherein the salesperson has to devote some time. In case of business organizations where you are in B2B kind of a situation, B2B transaction, business to business transaction, you would find that you are visiting the prospect organization, but since there is a meeting going on, the salesperson may not be getting the opportunity to meet the buying committee members there and then. He may have to wait for them. So that again will add to your waiting time. So this is another activity that the salesperson has to do. Again, let's jump to this activity, administration. What do we mean by administration? So whatever the salesperson has done, he has to report back to the management. So that reporting part, he has to do the billing. What do we mean by billing? Here we are basically talking about billing the customer who has purchased your product. So preparing the invoices and actually getting the invoices done. This is what we are referring to when we say billing. And then attending meetings. Naturally the salesperson will also be attending some meetings also back in his office, so that will also consume some of his time. So whatever time is left from these 4-5 activities, have a look, these 5 activities, the remaining time has to be spent on selling. Now please understand, the remaining time will be spent on actual selling. So it's not as if the salesperson only keeps on doing sales, only keeps on talking and interacting with the prospect or the customer. He has to do other activities also. The selling time is much less in comparison to whatever he does on other occasions, maybe preparing for the sales meeting with the client or maybe traveling. So this is what basically is the selling time, and you would prefer the salesperson to spend as much time as possible on selling. Time spent with buyer in person or in phone, because that is ultimately what is going to bring you sales, right? So if the salesperson does the remaining 5 activities efficiently, he will have more time to do actual selling, and that is what as a manager you have to ensure. So you will supervise and ensure that the salesperson is not spending too much time on preparing and traveling and food and breaks or waiting or administrative work. So how can you improve productivity of your sales force? Ask them to make more use of phone, rather than going every single time to the prospect and then finding out that the prospect is not available, or maybe the prospect is busy, or maybe the prospect is not willing to talk. It would always be better for the salesperson to first call up the prospect and find out his availability and whether he is willing to interact with the salesperson or not. So this would improve his productivity. He would not have to meet unnecessarily. He would not have to go to the prospects. He would only be going to those prospects who are free, comfortable and willing to meet him. So more use of phone can improve productivity. Simplified record keeping and reporting formats. So whatever reports have to be furnished by the salesperson for the consideration by the management, these reports can be made in easy formats. This will reduce the administration time for the salesperson, and he can concentrate more on the selling time. Then providing market information. If he has got market information, don't you think he will have to spend much less time in preparing, because he has got market information. He knows about the customer taste, he knows about the rival companies and rival products in the market, so he can be much better prepared because he does not have to collect all this information on his own. He has been given this particular piece of information. So this will reduce his time for preparation and he will be able to sell more, he would be able to devote more time to selling activities. Then, now this is very, very important, use of inside Salesforce. Now I hope you remember our discussion on inside Salesforce. Inside Salesforce, they would be manning the counters in the dealerships, in the retail points. They would be manning the telephone lines, and they would be known as inside Salesforce. They don't actually go to the field and visit the prospect or the customer. Now please understand, there could be telemarketers in your firm. Now their task would be to generate leads. Once they generate lead, they would provide these leads, they would qualify them, and they would provide this qualified leads to the salesperson. Now the salesperson does not have to spend too much time on generating leads on his own. So in that sense, he is able to concentrate on his main activity, which is actually making a presentation to the prospect and trying to sell him the product, right? So he would be able to spend more time on this selling activity. Again, upselling and cross-selling. Now the salesperson has made the sales. For example, he has actually sold the car to the customer. Now there is upselling going to take place, cross-selling also going to take place. Now what is upselling? I'll give you a simple example to make you understand, though I've discussed it in earlier sessions also. But upselling is basically when you try to sell another product of relatively higher value than the original product that the customer has bought. I'll give you an example. So let's say the customer has bought a car. Now you are selling him the upgraded version of the car, which is costlier. So this is an example of upselling. Note, what is cross-selling? Cross-selling are products which are used along with the products which have been purchased by the customer. So you are trying to sell it to them. For example, I'll give you another simple example. For example, somebody has bought a pair of trousers and a shirt from you. Then how do you decide? How do you try to cross-sell it to him? What will you do? You will try to sell him perfume also. You might try to sell him deodorant also. You might try to sell him a tie also. So this is an example of cross-selling, right? If you are trying to sell him a three-piece suit, a customer who has already purchased a pair of trousers and shirt, you are trying to sell him a three-piece suit, then it would be an example of upselling. Now, these tasks are actually done by the salesperson, but you can also make the inside Salesforce do these tasks, and naturally the field Salesforce would now be free for the actual selling activity. Again, reactivating the old accounts. There are old customers who have purchased from you, but they have stopped purchasing from you, or you want to remind them of getting the earlier product which they had purchased. You might want to remind them to get it replaced. So reactivating the old accounts, this can also be done by the inside Salesforce. Again, follow up once the product has been delivered, finding out whether the product is working fine, finding out whether the customer is satisfied or not. This is an example of follow up, and this follow up can also be done by the inside Salesforce, right? Naturally, the end result would be that the field Salesforce would have great amount of time left, considerable amount of time left for their main activity, which is selling. Again, technical support. What do we mean by technical support? So for example, a salesperson has now sold a generator to a bank branch. Now the bank branch wants some kind of a technical support, in the sense that they want the generator to be installed, and they want somebody to take care of the generator so that the generator keeps on working fine, keeps on working well. Now this kind of technical support need not be provided by the salesperson who has made the sale. It can be provided by your technical people, technical staff in the office. They can provide this kind of help, and now the salesperson would have more time. The field Salesforce would have more time to devote to selling activities. Likewise, we can have sales assistants. What are the tasks performed by sales assistants? They will call ahead. They will call up the client and confirm the appointments. If this happens, what will happen? If this happens and the appointment is confirmed, and then the salesperson goes to the client, then naturally he won't have to wait a lot. So in that sense, the Salesforce would have to spend much less time on waiting, much less time in waiting, and this would mean that they can spend more time on selling activity. Again, credit checks. Whether a client has sufficient amount of money to purchase my product or not, whether he has the purchasing power to purchase my product or not. Now this is something that you do in the preparation stage, where you try to find out whether somebody is able to purchase my product or not. Now if this is done by sales assistant, what will happen? The sales force will have much more time to devote to selling activities. Again, following upon deliveries, we have discussed this. So this can also be done by the sales assistant. Now here the follow-up on delivery would mean to confirm from the customer whether the product has reached, has been delivered on time, has reached him on time, and whether the product has also been installed and the customer has also been trained on using the product. So this is what basically following up is, and this is basically done by salesperson. But if you have sales assistants taking care of these kind of activities, then naturally the sales force will have much more time to devote to their main activity, which is basically the selling activity, this activity, right? Okay then, to make the sales force more productive, what else can you use? You can make use of technology. You can make use of softwares for route planning. Which is the most efficient route? I'll give an example. If you want to visit every single district in Uttarakhand, there can be n number of routes that you can take. You can start from Uttarkashi and then come to Chamoli, for example. You can start from Dehradun and Haridwar, and then finally you may reach Pithoragarh and Bageshwar. You can start from Nainital also. So there are n number of routes. But which route is going to be the most efficient, least time consuming? Which route should the salesperson should take? Should he start from Haridwar or should he start from Nainital and then cover Udham Singh Nagar? That can be done using technology. Route planning can be done using technology. I hope you remember our discussion on this aspect in production and operation management, wherein the route can be planned through softwares. Again, we can have softwares which ease the reporting requirements for the salesperson. For example, we can have some kind of an online reporting format. The salesperson only have to key in a few values and then the whole report would be generated and the whole report would be sent automatically through email to the sales manager. Now these things will ease the reporting burden on the salesperson, ease the administrative burden on the salesperson, and naturally he would be able to spend more time on selling activities, right? Now let's talk about how the performance is evaluated for the sales force. How do we evaluate the performance of our salespersons, right? I hope you remember our discussion on performance evaluation in human resource management. So we'll be talking about the same aspects, and I have told you earlier also, in case you want to further augment your answer with more and more points, you can always refer back to your notes in human resource management. So I'll be discussing this aspect in very brief here. Now, what all are the bases on which the performance of a salesperson is evaluated? One could be the knowledge that the salesperson has about the company. We have talked about this earlier also, about the product, not only your own company product, your company's product, but also the products which are brought out in the market by the competitors, by the rival firms. Then about the customer and the market, he should be able to know about the customer. He should know about the customer and how the customer tastes are changing, because he has been interacting with the customer on a daily basis. And then the territory which has been assigned to him. Take an example. For example, if a particular salesperson is given the Pithoragarh territory, he should know well. He should have sufficient information about the Pithoragarh district, the Pithoragarh territory. He should know which are the places where there is a lot of population density and which are the places the population density is much less. What are the prominent localities where more affluent people live, so that they can be sold the product. So he should have sufficient knowledge about the territory also. And apart from that, he should know about the laws also. He should not make any claim which is not correct. He should know about the laws also, and he should also have a sense of responsibility, that apart from selling the product to the customer, what all responsibilities does he have? He has the responsibility not to dupe the customer, to be honest and forthright with the customer. So these all responsibilities also he should know. So that is what we mean by salesperson knowledge. Again, another criteria for performance evaluation could be the personality of the salesperson. Again, we have discussed this. What are his mannerisms and how does he speak, how does he make his presentation, how does he look. Because if you're not looking tidy as a salesperson, you might turn off the customers or the clients or the prospects. So the appearance can also be one way of assessing the performance of the salesperson. And then the temperament, whether the salesperson remains cool and calm when he's bombarded with queries by the customers and the clients, or he loses his patience, he is unable to control his anger. Now this is what we mean by temperament, and many a times these personality aspects can also be used for performance evaluation, right? However, between 1 and 2, you can understand that assessing 2 is a very subjective task. So basically 1 probably is a better criteria for assessing the performance of the salesperson than 2. Then personal observation by the sales manager. So the sales manager can personally observe how the salesperson has been performing. Again, this is going to be a subjective method of evaluating the salesperson performance, and so it is not advisable to use such subjective methods, because then a perception might be created among the salespersons that their evaluation is not fair and they may get demotivated because of that. Then sales reports. Now this by far is the most objective method of assessing the performance of a salesperson. Why? Because basically sales reports which are turned in by the salesperson, the reports that are sent to the management, to the sales manager by the salesperson, they are made use of to do what? To assess or evaluate the performance of the salesperson. And please have a look here. In these sales reports, activity plans are there and activity results are there. So what all activity has the salesperson planned? Did he plan in a particular year? And what were the results of the activities which were undertaken by him? For example, what were his plans for developing new accounts, new customers? What is the meaning of the word account? Account basically used to refer to business customer. So if you have a new business customer whom you are selling to, then this particular business customer would be called a new account. Again, increasing business from existing ones. So not only he has to plan how he is going to acquire new customers, but also he has to plan how to sell more, how to upsell and cross-sell to the existing customers. And then what are the route plans that he is making use of? Because if you decide your route plan judiciously, you can be more efficient. And then what are the call plans? What do we mean by call plans? Call plans is basically the plan to visit the various customers or prospects in a particular route. So once you have decided the route, then you decide which customer to visit first, which customer to visit second. These customers are lying, they are settled along the route, so you decide which one to visit first, which one to visit second, and you have to do it in a fashion that you have to spend least amount of time and money in traveling. So these route plans and the call plans which are furnished by the salesperson, they can also act as criteria for performance evaluation of these salespeople. Then what are the results of the activities that they have done? How much expenses have they incurred? If they do not plan the route well and if they do not plan their calls well, what will happen? They may be taking a route which is longer. Naturally the traveling expense would increase. They may have to wait a lot. Naturally the waiting time would increase, which would mean they may have to stay, they may have to go for an overnight stay, so hotel and lodging expenses would increase. So these are the results of the activities undertaken by a salesperson, and this can also be a criteria. Now this is an even better criteria than the activity plans, because activity plans were only plans, but results are basically obtained after implementation of those plans. So while plans were still in the realm of imagination, results are actually seen. Fine. So that is why activity results are a better method to assess the performance of the salesperson. So how much expenses have they incurred? How many businesses have they lost? Which means how many dissatisfied customers have stopped purchasing from them, and how many new customers have they acquired? So how many customers have they been able to retain, and how many of these customers have stopped purchasing from these salespersons, and how many new customers have these salesperson acquired. So these could be another criteria to assess the performance of a salesperson. Then customer feedback. Now this is a very important criteria, because ultimately if the customer is not happy, naturally you are not going to be very successful. So customer feedback, how many complaints are there against a particular salesperson, or maybe the customers have couched their complaint in form of suggestions. So this could be one way. However, many customers generally don't complain on their own, even if they are dissatisfied. In fact, very small number complaints. The customers who are dissatisfied, they generally don't complain, they simply switch to some other brand. So lost customer analysis can be a way of finding out how many of the customers are dissatisfied, right? Then we can also conduct surveys among the customers to find out whether the customers are happy with a particular salesperson or not, and this could be an input to the performance evaluation exercise, right? Let's talk about the performance indicators which are there. So sales calls being made by the salesperson, number of sales calls per day, and average sales call time, cost per sales call, entertainment cost per sales call, percentage of orders per sales call, and average revenue per sales call. Now have a look at why these are important. If the salesperson makes too many calls every day, but he does not spend considerable amount of time on every single sales call. Sales call is basically visiting the client, visiting the prospect. So if he is visiting quite a number of prospects, but he is not spending too much time, he is maybe spending just 15 minutes with them, naturally he would not be able to convince them in those 15 minutes, and he would be not possible for him to make sales. So we will have a look at not only the number of sales calls per day, but also how much time does he spend on a particular sales call, and we are expecting that he should be spending considerable amount of time on a particular sales call, right? Then what are the costs per sales call? How much money has he spent? Because traveling cost can be there. Then if he is visiting some client or prospect who is living far away, then probably he will have to stay in that particular place overnight, so hotel and lodging. Then there he could be entertaining the customers and the prospects, so entertainment cost. So they will all add to the cost per sales call. It can so happen that a salesperson is spending too much on traveling and lodging and entertaining a particular prospect just to be able to make sales. So to keep that in control, we also take into consideration cost per sales call. So for every visit, how much money on an average is the salesperson spending? Entertainment cost per sales call. Many a times, just to get the business, what will the salesperson do? Try to think of it. He would spend a lot on entertaining the prospect, and that ultimately will lead to escalation of costs, and that would not be good for the firm. So entertainment cost per sales call, they are also taken into account while evaluating the salesperson performance. Percentage of orders per sales calls. What if the salesperson is only making sales call, but he is not able to generate any business? The customers he is visiting, the prospect he is visiting, they are not placing any orders. So this kind of sales call is of no use. So that also has to be taken into account, and that is why we have percentage of orders per sales call, and this should be high, while these things should be low. Costs per sales call should be low. Average sales call time should be high, but not too high, which would mean he is spending a lot of time on one single customer. That is also not good. And number of sales call per day, neither too high nor too low. Average revenue per sales call should be high. How much money? He is visiting a customer, but then he is only able to sell a good worth rupees 100, and he has spent the whole day. Not good. But on the other hand, if he has visited a customer he has spent one day on that particular customer, visiting that particular customer, but that particular customer has bought an item worth rupees 2 lakhs, then it makes sense. So we'll also take care of this particular aspect, average revenue per sales call. Then there are other performance indicators also. Average sales and profit per customer. So we are trying to find out how much sales are being made to a particular customer, and what is the profit that is generated from a particular customer. If you are making significant sales to a particular customer, but the profit that you are generating from is much less, probably the reason could be that you are selling those items which don't have very high margins. So you are selling those items to this customer which these items don't have very high margins, and because of that the profit is much less, right? Then ratio of new customers to lost customers. If you are losing significant chunk of customers every month or every year, then that is a cause of worry for the company, because that would ultimately lead to a lot of customer churn, and you have been told that customer acquisition is much less costly than customer acquisition is much more costly than customer retention. So if you are losing out customers, then probably you are not performing so well for the company. So though you might be also acquiring new customers, you should not be losing the existing customers. Again, what is the overall expenses? What is the cost of sales? What are the overall expenses as a percentage of total sales that you have made? So maybe there are two salesperson. One salesperson has made sales worth rupees 1 lakh, and he has spent 10,000 to get that 1 lakh worth of sales. So probably he has spent 10% of the sales on his lodging and traveling. So his expenditure has been almost 10% of the total sales. On the other hand, there is a particular salesperson who has made a sales of rupees 200, and he has spent 100 rupees in entertaining the customer. Naturally, you would not like to give this particular salesperson who has spent 50% of the total sales revenue in entertaining his customer. You would not want to give him a very high performance rating. So this is also taken into account. Friends, in the next lecture that we'll talk about motivation, and we will also talk about sales quotas. And please understand that the performance evaluation is very much connected to quotas, because quotas are basically the targets which are given away to the salespersons. So many a times we also use these quotas to assess the performance level of a particular salesperson. So this particular aspect we'll be covering in the next session. Thank you very much for your time.